Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are starting this evening's program. Shall we please be on our feet as the speaker and the chair take the high table? I humbly ask that we put our mobile phones on silent. Thank you.
Good evening. The President of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, past presidents of the Academy, vice presidents, fellows of the Academy, distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, I warmly welcome you all to this evening's event. It is a tradition in the Academy and in most institutions of higher learning to give their newly elected members an opportunity to deliver inaugural lectures in their areas of expertise to their colleagues and the general public. This evening, we are privileged to have a scholar to speak to us on a very topical subject. The inaugural lecture used to be the Academy's in-house program, but because of its YouTube platforms, now permit me to introduce the chairman for this event, who will take over from me and introduce the speaker. Our chair for this evening is Professor AYEE, Vice President of the Arts Section of this Academy since January 2023. Professor AYEE held the position of Rector, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Dean, and Head of Department in 3 higher education institutions in Ghana and in South Africa. He was elected a fellow of this Academy in 2005 and served as Assistant Honorary Secretary from 2014 to 2015 and as Honorary Treasurer from 2016 to 2017. He was the occupant of the UNESCO United Nations University Leadership Academy Chair in Leadership Studies at the University of Jordan in 2011, and the Emeka Anyaoku Visiting Chair of Commonwealth Studies at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, University of London in 2013. Professor AYEE served as a member of a team of experts that drafted Ghana's National Decentralization Policy Framework and Action Plan in 2015 to 2019, and the National Decentralization Policy and Strategy from 2020 to 2024. Professor AYEE has over 200 publications in several areas of political science, public policy, and administration. His latest publications include 3 edited books. The first one is Think Tanks, Governance and Development in Africa. The second is Political Institutions, Party Politics and Communication in Ghana, 3 Decades of the Fourth Republic. And the third one is Public Sector Management and Economic Governance in Ghana, 3 Decades of the Fourth Republic. Professor AYEE's current research interests include higher education governance and management, politicians and bureaucrats' relationship, political transition, and democratic backsliding. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our chair, Professor Joseph AYEE.
Thank you, Honorary Secretary of the Academy, the President of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, past presidents, past and current vice presidents, fellows of the Academy, my dear students are here, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We have an outstanding scholar who is going to give an equally important topic. He is going to speak on a very important topic, rethinking development finance for inclusive green finance. Are there financial stability implications? An outstanding scholar is Professor Joshua YINDENABA ABOR. He is a financial economist, qualified accountant, and professor of finance with numerous years of expertise, mainly in development finance and economics research, as well as in senior level practitioner, policy and consulting roles. He is a former dean of one of the largest business schools in Africa, the University of Ghana Business School. He holds a PhD in finance from Stellenbosch University, South Africa, after completing the PhD coursework in financial economics at Harvard University in the USA. And since everybody wants to know his or her beginnings, I will start from his beginning. He had his basic education at the Agri Road #1 school in Tema. He completed the GCE ordinary and advanced levels at Tema Secondary School and St. Paul's Secondary School at Benue, respectively. He obtained the BSc Administration Accounting degree with first-class honors in 1998, an MBA Finance degree by thesis in 2001, both from the University of Ghana. He is also qualified as a member of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, ACCA UK, in 2002, and became a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, FCCA, in 2006. He gained a scholarship from Stellenbosch University to pursue the PhD program. And as part of the PhD study, he also had a USAID scholarship to do a year's work at the Department of Economics, Harvard University. He joined the University of Ghana in February 2003 as a lecturer. He was promoted to senior lecturer in 2005, associate professor in 2007, and professor in 2010, becoming the first to be promoted to full professor at the University of Ghana Business School. He served as head of Department of Finance, University of Ghana Business School, 2008 to 2011, and the Vice Dean, University of Ghana Business School, 2011 to 2014. He is a researcher with the African Economic Research Consortium and a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. He is also a member of the American Economic Association, the Canadian Economic Association, and the Economic Society of South Africa. Professor Abor contributes to the financial, economics, and finance business literature, mainly in the areas of banking and finance, monetary policy, development finance, financial market development, fintech and financial inclusion, climate and green finance, sustainable finance and investment, SME finance, private sector development, corporate finance, governance, international finance and trade, and international finance flows and economic growth. It has over 140 publications. They are listed in the brochure. I will not go over them. Professor Abor serves on several boards of some companies, including the Ghana Investment and Security Institute, SAS Investment Management Limited, and the University of Ghana Enterprises Limited, UGEL, and he chairs the boards of Alliance Life Insurance, Best Western Premier Hotel, Micro Shipping Limited, and Oasis Capital Ghana Limited. He is a member of the Bank of Ghana Monetary Policy, Committee, and a member of the Domestic Credit Rating Agency Implementation Committee. He has consulted for several local and international organizations. At the personal level, Professor Joshua YINDENABA ABOR hails from Kong. I hear that word is not Congo, but Kong, in the Upper East region of Ghana. He was born in Tema to Mr. Abor Ndobiri and Miss Amina Tobga. Joshua fellowships with the Fountain Gate Chapel, Fanco. He is married to Professor Patience Asewa Abor, and they are blessed with three children, Ivana, Bastian, and Venka. He loves music and sports. He played as the top seed for both the Legon Hall and the University of Ghana table tennis teams during his undergraduate studies. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our speaker, Professor Joshua YINDENABA ABOR.
Good evening, everyone. And Chair, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I want to appreciate all of you for making time to drive all the way to this place. I want to first of all appreciate the Academy for this platform to share some thought on this important topic as part of my inaugural lecture. So basically, we are interested in how development finance, specifically development finance institutions, can drive inclusive green finance, and how all of that can promote financial stability. So that's all we want to do. I will try and do this in about 45 minutes, because I know the day is fast spent. We had a very long meeting here in the Academy. Mr. Chairman, the President of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, past presidents of the Academy, vice presidents of the Academy, fellows of the Academy, distinguished guests, students, the media, ladies and gentlemen. The importance of ensuring sustainable finance for climate action has become very topical in the policy space, and countries across the globe have recognized the need for immediate climate action. Many countries have so far ratified the Paris Agreement. Nevertheless, efforts to achieve global climate goals remain inadequate. Greenhouse gas emissions are increasing, creating concerns about slow economic growth in the presence of climate policies. Taking climate action does not only suggest good stewardship in environmental sustainability, but is also seen as sound economic policy, considering that the cost associated with inaction or slow action may be greater than the cost of taking immediate action. Taking urgent and timely climate action offers several opportunities for growth and modernization in some important areas, such as promoting low emission and resilient infrastructure, drawing on untapped economic potential, driving exciting new technological development, and building more inclusive societies. Focusing attention on smart green agriculture, clean energy, and green infrastructure comes with unique benefits that can spur growth. Developing countries are said to be mostly vulnerable to the impact of climate change, and if important measures or appropriate measures are not taken, over 100 million people could be rendered poor by 2030. Also, climate change may cause over 143 million people in the developing world to move out of their countries. Therefore, making important decisions in terms of transitioning towards climate-compatible development path requires these countries to implement inclusive development strategies supported by development projects that consider climate change. Poor households are extremely impacted by climate change, with less financial options in dealing and coping with the consequences. And this is according to the Alliance for Financial Inclusion 2021. The situation is even more severe in climate-vulnerable countries. And emerging and developing countries are more, of course, vulnerable to the effects of climate change, constituting major risk to financial stability and poverty alleviation and deepening financial exclusion. Climate change risk and financial exclusion are directly linked. According to the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, about 4 out of every 5 unbanked adult population in the world, representing more than 1 billion people, live in the most climate-vulnerable countries. Also, about 58% of adult population in the most climate-vulnerable countries are not financially resilient, compared to 25% in less climate-vulnerable countries. Financial resources and sound investments are therefore required in dealing with the effects of climate change, reducing emission, promoting adaptation, as well as building resilience. The benefits that flow from such investments are enormous, exceeding any related costs and ultimately helping to build the sustainable economy. The transition to a green economy is necessary to unlock new opportunities. And the World Bank actually estimates that on the average, investing $1 should yield $4 in benefits. The Sharm el-Sheikh Accord on Financial Inclusion, Climate Change, and Green Finance, or Inclusive Green Finance, was endorsed by an overwhelming 94% of the Alliance for Financial Inclusion membership in 2017. The Accord actually commits the Alliance members to jointly work with partners in identifying and understanding and implementing inclusive finance policy solutions that also have positive outcomes for the environment, concentrating on the most climate vulnerable communities. Inclusive green finance is an emerging concept which is gaining global momentum and interest, and as it contributes to including the most vulnerable groups in climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. It was also emphasized at the 28th session of the UN Climate Change Conference, COP28, in the UAE in 2013. Inclusive green finance is necessary for low-income households and vulnerable groups, in addition to micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises, to be able to access financial products and services in building resilience and facilitating the financing of climate-smart investment and income-generating activities. This constitutes part of the effort to manage the impact of climate change and transitioning to green economies. So different players have a role to play in mobilizing support in addressing climate change and sustainable development. Development finance, and for that matter, development finance institutions, have been defined as critical actors in this regard. They provide long-term finance to promote economic growth and sustainable development. Development finance institutions, or DFIs, leverage financial resources from capital markets owing to their strong credit ratings, and this enables them to provide long-term capital to support development projects. They also play a very critical role in enhancing inclusive finance, and for that matter, inclusive green finance. This lecture, Mr. Chairman, focuses on the role of the DFIs in addressing the challenges of climate change, and financial exclusion, and the implications that will have for financial stability. So in this lecture, what I seek to do is to provide, first of all, an overview of the perspectives and rationale for development finance. Then in the next section, I'll look at the challenges of climate change risk and financial exclusion. And then I also explain the concept of inclusive green finance. And then I'll examine how DFIs support inclusive green finance. Then I'll examine the implications of all these for financial stability. And then I'll conclude by providing some pointers for policy consideration and prescriptions. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, on the perspectives and rationale for development finance. Development finance recognizes the need to fill the funding gap between the demand for capital and the supply of available capital through various interventions. The financing gap is as a result of the failure of financial markets to provide the required finance in supporting economic activity. Development finance interventions are targeted at ensuring the provision of required capital when financial markets fail in this regard. The interventions include curtailing the imperfections in financial markets and institutions to enhance the level of efficiency, and also establishing alternative financial institutions to provide direct finance in the market. Interventions for perfecting the financial markets include measures that seek to improve the performance of financial markets and institutions in ways that enhance available financing for development. This is extremely important considering the significant role that financial markets and institutions play in facilitating the supply of funds for financing economic activity. From a complementary theoretical perspective, this involves establishing DFIs as alternative financial institutions to provide long-term finance to promote private investment to drive economic growth and sustainable development. DFIs mainly focus on areas that are often ignored by conventional finance. The functioning of financial markets is generally associated with boom and bust cycles, necessitating the presence of DFIs. The argument made by Keynes and Berger is that their theoretical foundations is that financial crisis is a reaction to excesses in the past. Such excesses seem to be much larger, especially in very liberal and poorly regulated banking and financial systems. The pro-cyclical nature of private finance suggests that DFIs are critical in providing counter-cyclical financing in the short and medium term. The world signed up for sustainable finance, sustainable development goals after 2015, building on the progress made on the Millennium Development Goals and incorporating additional goals. And some of these new goals include reducing inequality, ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns, combating climate change and its impact, promoting peaceful and inclusive societies, providing justice, and promoting the sustainable use of global ecosystems, among others. The achievement of these goals is dependent on the availability of long-term financing, and DFIs have been identified to play a crucial role in this respect. DFIs trace their history to the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, which was based on the work of John Keynes and Europe's reconstruction plans post-World War II. This was aimed at establishing an institution to promote financial stability through permanent supply of finance for the reconstruction agenda and support agricultural production, thus averting the damaging effect of private finance on post-war World War II economic recovery. The 1950s marked the golden age of DFIs, when developing countries pursued a rapid industrialization drive. This continued through the 1980s, when the wave of privatizations resulted in the privatization of more than 250 state-owned banks. The Washington Consensus curtailed the role of national development banks in the development of capital markets, actually domestic capital markets. In fact, there's an aspect of the literature that describes national development banks as inefficient and market distorted. However, after the 2007-2008 global financial crisis, many have reconsidered DFIs as a means of smoothing the effect of the liquidity and credit squeeze occasioned by the crisis. The impact of the COVID-19 crisis also brought about renewed interest in the relevance of national development banks to address shocks in the economy. The evolution of national development banks tends to vary across countries and regions. Ghana has had its own experience with respect to the evolution of DFIs, with the establishment of the National Investment Bank in 1963, the Agricultural Credit and Cooperative Bank, which became known as the Greek Development Bank in 1965, and then the Bank for Housing and Construction in 1975. Now, the Bank for Housing and Construction went through some reforms, but it eventually ceased operation in 2000. Both the Agri Development Bank and NIB, the National Investment Bank, also went through significant restructuring, and in 2004, they became universal banks when the central bank removed the distinction between commercial development and merchant banks. Beyond that, we've witnessed some development in the development finance landscape in Ghana, with the latest additions being the establishment of the Ghana Export-Import Bank and the Development Bank Ghana. Mr. Chairman, in November 2016, during my inaugural lecture at the University of Ghana on the topic, Financing Private Enterprise Growth in Africa, How Do We Drive the Real Economy? I commended the government for the establishment of the Ghana Export-Import Bank to drive trade development. I further recommended the establishment of many more DFIs to support enterprise development. Subsequently, in 2020, we saw the establishment of the Development Bank Ghana to provide long-term finance to support the productive sectors of the economy, in addition to the provision of the regulatory framework to support DFI's ecosystem. Mr. Chairman, it's gratifying to note that the leading political parties in this country are proposing to set up specific development banks. There are proposals for the establishment of a mining development bank and a women's national development bank. In developing the mining sector, Mr. Chairman, we should not lose sight of the fact that these mining resources are essentially wasting assets with a finite life. So we need to be careful not to deny future generations of the ability to meet their own development needs and aspirations, as suggested by the Brundtland report in 1987, which defined sustainable development. And I believe that the focus of this bank should not be financing multinational companies, because these firms have access to foreign capital. I believe this bank should be focusing on financing indigenous mining firms that will engage in sustainable mining. With respect to promoting women-owned and women-led businesses, this is well anchored in the SDGs, specifically Goal 5, is achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. And I think that in the case of a Women's Development Bank, the governance structure, I agree that it should be managed by women, but the governance structure should be composed in such a way that you have some men also represented on the board. The board shouldn't be made up of 100% women. In the spirit of diversity, you should also have men on the board, just as we preach that women should be represented on board of some companies. In fact, the literature suggests that when women sit on boards, the men behave. But when the board is made up of 100% men, they fight. But look at this theory doesn't apply to parliamentarians, because they fight in parliament even when the women are there. And you see this in the Asian market. They really fight in parliament. Mr. Chairman, let me talk about the challenges of climate change risk and financial exclusion. A major risk to the global efforts of achieving sustainable development is the challenge of climate change. The impacts of climate change are far-reaching, and the consequences are dire for most vulnerable groups. Climate change now constitutes environmental, social, and economic threat to the existence of humankind, and in recent times, the World Economy Survivor has become the most expensive global item to finance. The global economy is thus faced with the challenge of designing climate change preventive and adaptive approaches to achieve sustainable growth and development. Climate change is regarded as one of the most urgent policy issues confronting the entire globe. And as observed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, human-induced climate change is causing weather and climate extremes in every region of the world, which is severely impacting vulnerable segments of the society. This impact can also have destabilizing effects on the financial sector with potential systemic consequences. Addressing the negative consequences of climate change has led to diverse policies and conventions upholding the migration to a low-carbon, more resource-proficient, and sustainable economy. These include the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Sustainable Development Goals, the European Union's policy to reduce high carbon emissions, the Paris Agreement, and Africa's Agenda 2063. The ongoing discussion on the need to reduce carbon emission and ensure climate change mitigation and adaptation for all countries is an important issue. And as much as this is also of much concern for Africa, it is imperative to recognize the unique position of Africa concerning climate change. According to the African Trade Report 2024, Africa's carbon emissions are the lowest in the world. It is the least responsible for climate change, yet the most vulnerable to it. African economies contribute about 3.78% to greenhouse gas emissions, while economies of the US and European Union make up about 14% and 9% of global emissions, respectively. And this according to the African Trade Report by the Afrexim Bank. Despite the continent's low contribution to carbon emission, it is among the hardest hit and the least resilient to the impact of climate change. Geographically, Africa is more prone to adverse climate events, and it is the most vulnerable region in the world to drought and the second most vulnerable to flood events. In Africa, the rise in temperature is faster than anywhere in the world, and by the end of 2020, and by the end of the 21st century, this could rise to 6 degrees Celsius. Also, the continent continues to experience major economic and developmental challenges, such as high inflation rates, high debt burden, high borrowing costs, geopolitical instability, inadequate infrastructure, growing poverty, and food insecurity. These undermine African government's ability to respond to climate shocks, further deepening the vulnerability in the region. The African Trade Report therefore proposes that the challenge for Africa's decarbonization drive should be pursued in such a manner that it does not in any way compromise the continent's ability to meet its developmental goals and aspirations. ORAMA 2022 suggests that boosting intra-African trade through successful implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area actually presents an opportunity to reduce carbon emission. For instance, intra-African trade will minimize the need to transport to distant markets, and this should actually significantly reduce emissions arising from shipping, which currently represent the third largest contributor to climate change after China and the USA. ORAMA also indicates that emissions can be further reduced if the new industrial capacities that will emerge to support African regional value chains could be configured to be more energy efficient than the current production facilities in exporting countries. With respect to financial exclusion, this is significantly higher in countries most vulnerable to climate change. And globally, over 1.4 billion adults still lack access to formal financial systems, with more than 1 billion living in the most climate vulnerable countries. In all, 41% of the adult population in most climate vulnerable economies are unbanked, compared with 11% in less climate vulnerable economies and 24% globally. Such unbanked persons lack access to financial products and services to assist them deal with the impact of climate change. In climate-vulnerable countries, even for those that have access to financial services, financial resilience constitutes a major challenge. Out of about 3 billion adults living in the most climate-vulnerable countries, 1.7 billion are not financially resilient. In these countries, 58% of adults are not financially resilient, compared to 25% in less climate-vulnerable countries and 41% globally. In the most climate-vulnerable countries, about 73% of adults are either unbanked or are not financially resilient. Therefore, financial inclusion is an important policy issue for climate-vulnerable countries. Mr. Chairman, I wish to, at this point, explain the concept of inclusive green finance. Financial inclusion entails the access and usage of affordable financial products and services by individuals, households, and firms to meet their needs. It involves financial transactions, payments, savings, credit, insurance, etc., delivered responsibly and sustainably. Financial inclusion policies actually aim at promoting access to affordable financial products and services to households and firms that otherwise would be excluded from the formal financial system. These are typically poor households at the base of the economic pyramid, and SMEs, as well as vulnerable groups like women and the youth, who are most affected by climate change. Green finance, on the other hand, comprises all forms of investment or lending that consider environmental effect and enhance environmental sustainability. Green finance is an aspect or branch of sustainable finance that combines all financial transactions that are conducive to an energy transition that tackles climate change. It considers the protection and support of the environment and its impact on finance and investment through financial processes, products, and services. The concept of green finance and financial inclusion were previously considered in the literature and policy space as distinct and mainly unrelated. For instance, central banks and financial regulators have largely treated green finance and financial inclusion issues differently, mostly with different personnel handling these issues. It is, however, imperative to note that there are meaningful overlaps between the two concepts, considering that the main target groups for financial inclusion tend to be disproportionately exposed to the risk and effects of climate change. Therefore, it is important to consider a holistic approach of linking green finance and financial inclusion policies into an integrated, inclusive green finance framework. And actually, figure 1 here shows the overlap between green finance and inclusive finance or financial inclusion. Inclusive green finance is thus defined as access to and usage of financial products and services with the aim of building resilience to the negative effects of climate change, loss of biodiversity and ecosystems, and facilitating the participation of low-income households, SMEs, and vulnerable groups in the green and low-carbon economy. Inclusive green finance is a new concept and evolving policy area for which the Alliance of Financial Inclusion member institutions have started formulating and implementing policies, regulations, and national strategies to mitigate or build resilience to the environmental, health, social, and economic impact of climate change. The inclusive green finance framework focuses on the intersection of inclusive finance and resilience building for households and SMEs in the face of rising climate shocks. The approach involves the use of financial products and services to build resilience and support adaptation of lives and livelihoods in response to changing climate. For instance, the use of financial products such as digital payment account can help in disbursing social programs following the impact of climate change and natural disasters. Insurance and savings instruments can also be used to build resilience and adaptation. The boundaries of inclusive green finance as provided by the United Nations Secretary General Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, a working group, actually include three main areas, and I've talked about them. I wouldn't want to bore you on. So these are finance, green, and then inclusive. So we can find the intersection there. So you put all the concepts together. So scaling up inclusive green finance is necessary for two main policy purposes: mitigation and adaptation, while enhancing social outcomes and empowering those at the bottom of the economic pyramid. Mr. Chairman, I want to now talk about how DFIs support inclusive green finance. The extant literature recognizes the important roles DFIs play, and these include providing counter-cyclical financing or counteracting the pro-cyclical nature of private financing, promoting innovation and structural transformation, enhancing inclusive finance, supporting the financing of infrastructure investment, which is also critical for economic growth, deepening financial market and intermediation, supporting the promotion of public goods, and particularly combating climate change, and more broadly, promoting environmental sustainability and green growth. For this lecture, I'll focus on the roles of DFIs with respect to driving inclusive finance and financing climate action. So let's look at the role of DFIs in promoting inclusive finance. So DFIs play a significant role in enhancing inclusive finance. They provide finance to support SMEs and households' agricultural activities on a long-term basis. DFIs support in implementing national development strategies with the aim of driving inclusive finance in sectors that traditionally were excluded from formal financial markets. Improving inclusive finance among SMEs is a precondition for improved productivity and innovation. Financing SMEs is still a critical policy issue in emerging and developing countries. Whereas commercial banks may avoid providing long-term financing to SMEs, DFIs are ready to provide long-term patient capital to finance the activity, which helps in spurring inclusive growth. Let's now talk about their intervention with respect to climate action. DFIs also play a role in promoting environmental sustainability by combating climate change. It is estimated that developing economies require an estimated amount of between $140 to $175 billion by 2030 to deal with climate change. Additionally, an estimated between $43 and $55 billion is needed per annum during the period of 2030 and 2040 to produce clean energy in Africa. And this is in relation to the fact that the continent can only raise between 8 and 9.2 billion annually. Afreximbank supports continental and national efforts by implementing a range of tools and programs to address development and climate-related issues. The bank's major climate efforts include establishing the Kenya Climate Change Adaptation Facility and cooperation on the battery Pekeza Manufacturing Initiative in Zambia and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. DFIs intervene in financing climate change by scaling up their level of capital, in addition to leveraging private finance towards low carbon and climate-resilient pathways. For instance, in 2023, the ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development provided multi-sector framework loan to finance at least 70% climate action and environmental sustainability projects in the ECOWAS region. The bank has also been instrumental in financing solar projects within the ECOWAS sub-region. DFIs interact with government entities, manage resources, influence policy, and drive the increase in climate finance. For example, the China Development Bank has close cooperation with the government. It educates the government on what policies to implement to attract more investment to address issues of climate finance. DFIs are able to access long-term domestic and international capital to provide climate finance at scale. They also help in providing capacity building and technical assistance to issuers of green bonds. Leveraging private capital in climate finance is expedient and an important means of dealing with climate change. DFIs have extensive knowledge of private sector players and have also established long-term relationships with them. This enables them to provide large-scale financial services that meet the needs of private sector players. DFIs leverage private finance by assuring the investment and helping private investors to de-risk, since most private sector players tend to be risk-averse. The African Development Fund, which is a concessional arm of the African Development Bank Group, established a climate action window to rally partners from the public and private sectors. The resources mobilized under this dedicated window are located through 3 sub-windows. 75% of the financing towards adaptation action in line with Africa's most urgent priorities, and then 15% for supporting mitigation, and then 10% is used to deliver technical assistance. The mitigation and adaptation investment sub-windows will support projects across 6 thematic sectors: agriculture and food security, water security, climate information and early warnings, green transport and infrastructure, green energy and energy efficiency, and green finance. The technical assistance component will help countries develop national climate policies and strategies, enhance the environment for climate investment, and prepare the way for investment-ready projects. The Development Bank of Southern Africa Climate Finance Facility, for example, is a climate finance fund that uses the Green Bank model aimed at de-risking and increasing the bankability of climate projects to crowd in significant investment from commercial banks and project sponsors. In Latin America and the Caribbean region, for instance, DFIs actually, they have what they call the DFIs Green Finance Association. And they have about 40 DFIs that provide $2 billion in credit line programs and also mobilize $6 billion in private green investment. The Nacional Financiera in Mexico leverage the domestic financial market in addition to other multilateral financial institutions to develop a scheme to finance the first wind farm in the country. It also issued bonds to attract private investors to finance eligible wind energy generation project in Mexico. Again, in China, the China Development Bank helped in designing policies to attract private investors in renewable energy and also provided significant initial finance, making China one of the major global promoters of solar power. DFIs are capable of creating attractive incentives for private sector to participate in climate finance. They are able to accomplish this by offering appropriate terms and conditions, which help private actors and local financial institutions deal with the risks and barriers that prevent private investment in green and climate versatile projects. Mr. Chairman, I want at this point to talk about what the implications of all these are for financial stability. So what are the implications of all these issues we talked about for financial stability? Financial stability refers to the safety and soundness of financial institutions and the entire financial system. Financial stability describes the state in which the financial system is resilient to economic shocks and is well capable of smoothly accomplishing its basic functions. Such economic shocks may arise as a result of the impact of climate change, given that climate risk poses a major risk to the stability of the financial system. Central banks and financial regulators have recognized environmental risk, particularly climate risk, as material risk to the stability of individual financial institutions and the financial system as a whole. Financial stability ensures that effective and efficient allocation of resources, assessment and management of financial risk, and support for price stability in the value of real and financial assets, thus also contributing to monetary stability. Maintaining the stability of the financial sector during periods of elevated financial stress and bad market conditions is important in maintaining an increased level of employment. Though the extant literature on the nexus between financial inclusion and financial stability is still ongoing, with mixed results, several studies have shown that inclusive finance drives financial stability. Financial inclusion encourages deposits from not only large depositors, but also small depositors, and a wide and varied deposit base ensures stable funding for depository financial institutions. So what we are saying is that, banks will not only target large depositors, but they will target everybody, even those at the base of the pyramid. And that provides some kind of sustainability for banks in terms of their funding. Also, lending to a variety of sectors creates diversified loan portfolio, reducing concentration risk and credit risk, thereby supporting financial stability. Financial inclusion enhances economic participation of all households and firms in the economy, hence providing a wider set of tools for managing asset price fluctuations and financial risk, including those related to climate change. So if you lend, you own lend to a large pool of customers, then you'll be spreading your risk as opposed to just concentrating on very few blue chip borrowers. Financial stability can also promote financial inclusion in the sense that it improves trust in the financial system and encourages the patronage of formal financial services instead of informal channels. However, there's always a trade-off if the link between inclusive finance and financial stability is not properly managed. For instance, lending to a variety of the underserved, if not properly managed, may lead to high non-performing loans. So if we are reckless in just going on a lending spree without putting in place the necessary checks, you will run into serious problems with your loans. Your loans will become bad. If regulation is not carried out proportionately, this may discourage financial institutions from lending to the underserved to reduce their exposure. If there's a regulation on sustainability with disclosure requirements, which is not implemented with proportionality, this may cause financial institutions to de-risk by not increasing their lending to vulnerable groups. This may be the case for climate change-related projects by low-income populations, agricultural, and SME sectors. Climate shocks can affect the stability of the financial sector by destabilizing households and firms and increasing banks' credit and market risk. The growing literature on the relationship between green finance and financial stability suggests that green finance can promote financial stability by minimizing environmental and climate risk in private sector activities as well as in the financial sector. The Bank for International Settlement points to the importance of the financial sector in driving private sector investment in climate change-related projects. An important aspect of this discussion is how financial inclusion promotes financial stability in the context of climate change, or how inclusive green finance supports financial stability. Inclusive green finance strengthens vulnerable groups in terms of their resilience in the face of unexpected challenges. Increasing low-income populations' access to resilience building tools like microinsurance will help such vulnerable groups improve their resilience by creating opportunities for them to transition to green. For instance, randomized field experiments in Burkina Faso and Senegal showed that women who bought index-based agricultural insurance policies had higher average yields and were better able to manage food insecurity and income shocks. The use of mobile money also helps in facilitating risk sharing by allowing for easy transfer of funds to family and friends who have been hit by crisis. In addition to building the resilience of individuals to climate change, green lending is related to low credit risk and improved resilience of the portfolios of banks. Firms that exhibit better performance on environmental issues generally show overall better performance, which allows for easy access to lower cost of finance. Insurance firms, for instance, are likely to shy away from covering risk in firms that have poor environmental risk management systems. DFIs and other finance providers are incorporating green issues as part of the conditions for accessing finance by SMEs. As these vulnerable groups become more resilient, this translates into an increase in economic resilience, which is necessary for promoting financial stability. Increasing inclusive finance promotes financial sector deepening, which helps in ensuring that households and SMEs have access to new green opportunities and at the same time support the growth of green sectors of the economy, including green buildings, electric vehicles, public transport infrastructure, climate-smart water, renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and solid waste management. Mr. Chairman, I would want to conclude. There's global recognition for immediate climate action. Many countries have far ratified the Paris Agreement. Nevertheless, efforts to achieve global climate goals remain inadequate. Significant financial resources and investment are required to address climate change, reducing emissions, promoting adaptation, as well as building resilience. DFIs have been recognized to play a very important role, a critical role in investing in climate action necessary to build a sustainable economy. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, these issues we've discussed regarding the role of DFIs in driving inclusive green finance have implications for financial stability, thus providing useful pointers for specific policy prescription. And I'll quickly run through my recommendations. I'm not thanking you yet. All right, so direct financing should be provided by DFIs towards climate action and sustainable development. DFIs, especially multilateral development banks, can raise huge amounts of capital on the capital market at lower rates. Therefore, the financing provided by DFIs must focus on important areas such as smart green agriculture, clean energy, and green infrastructure. Mainstream climate finance into operations of DFIs. Climate finance needs to be mainstreamed into DFIs operations. They can support in mobilizing additional finance, developing relevant policy framework, and implementing green projects. DFIs could assist in ensuring that sustainable climate policy is fully compatible with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. DFIs can achieve the global goal of climate action by mainstreaming climate change into the activities and operations, as well as adaptation and financing mechanisms. 3, encourage collaborative efforts of DFIs. Multilateral development banks need to collaborate with national development banks that have contextual knowledge, which puts them in the right position to on-lend to target entities. This will require implementing the necessary safeguards and risk management frameworks, as well as applying appropriate pricing models. Engage shareholders of DFIs. Shareholders of DFIs need to demonstrate the political will to support the fight against climate change. They must consider increasing capital to DFIs, especially multilateral development banks and national development banks. And they need to think of new appropriate financing models in terms of adaptation finance. There's also the need to involve other international organizations as part of the policy dialogue. Increase and leverage private investment. Private finance mobilization needs to increase significantly. Major private sector investors, such as pension funds, life insurance companies, investment firms, impact investors, need to work with their asset managers and their investee companies to support the climate actions and decarbonization efforts and align with the net zero transition target. DFIs need to use their knowledge, expertise, and relationship with the private sector to leverage private finance to support climate-related projects. DFIs' involvement help to de-risk such climate-related projects and motivate the private sector's participation. Improve government's fiscal position. Governments need to improve their fiscal position through enhanced domestic resource mobilization to finance increased public investment in climate-related areas without increasing government borrowing, which tends to crowd out the private sector. This will require increasing tax revenues through the imposition of appropriate carbon taxes. Improving fiscal position and the use of public funds can help crowd in private investment through public-private partnerships. Ensure efficient management of natural resources to support sustainable development. Non-renewable natural resources are wasting assets with finite life. Therefore, revenue generated from their exploitation must be invested to drive inclusive growth and sustainable development. There's a need for African countries to take a look at their investment and stability agreement around these resources in ways that promote financial development and inclusive growth. And I would say that, the extractive sector is not properly integrated with the rest of the economy. These operate as silos. So we benefit from such sectors through the export revenue. And if the export revenue will not come to support the financial market, then we are not really benefiting from these resources. And these resources are wasting. They will finish at some point. So how are we benefiting? And that's what Prof. Aki was talking about the other day. I was fortunate to be part of his committee looking at stability agreement in Ghana. Promote intra-regional trade to reduce carbon emission related to long-distance transport. An effective implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area to promote intra-African trade will be helpful in curtailing emissions that arise from transporting goods to long-distance markets. Explore voluntary and compliance carbon markets. Carbon markets provide carbon finance, which includes financial tools such as carbon emission trading to minimize the impact of greenhouse gases. Voluntary and compliance carbon markets are useful in generating substantial debt-free finance for priorities such as restoration of forests, peatlands, and degraded lands, and accelerated phase-out of coal, provided they are supported by strong frameworks to ensure integrity in both the supply and demand for credit. Reform the global financial architecture by revising architecture of channeling special drawing rights. Surplus special drawing rights can also serve as a source of international public funding for climate change. About 650 billion, and that translates to 456 special drawing rights in billions, was allocated to the International Monetary Fund member countries in August 2021, of which 58% was allocated to high-income countries that may not be used for balance of payment support. The Sustainability and Resilience Trust, established by the IMF, based on voluntary contributions of special drawing rights from countries that do not need them, will be useful in financing climate-related projects in emerging markets and developing economies through loans. IMF programs need to be looked at, and there's clearly the need for appropriate and fair allocation of special drawing rights. Generally, special drawing rights are short-term liquidity form of injection that allows developing countries to address balance of payment challenges. However, climate finance is required for long-term investment that may be needed by high-income countries that are not experiencing balance of payment difficulties. The IMF may, in that case, consider transferring special drawing rights to multilateral development banks to support climate priorities in emerging markets and developing countries. Multilateral development banks can leverage special drawing rights several times, thus rechanneling special drawing rights through multilateral development banks may be more efficient in that respect. Mr. Chairman, we also need to support the important role of central banks and financial regulators. Central banks and other financial regulators need to incorporate climate-related risk when carrying out stress testing scenarios to assess overall financial stability. Financial institutions need to effectively identify climate risk on their balance sheets and loan portfolios and allocate capital appropriately. In addition to measuring risk through stress tests, central banks need to manage them in a manner that delivers good outcomes from a macroprudential point of view. Central banks should also focus on mobilizing financial institutions under their supervision to actively support and finance the net zero transition. Central banks can promote green finance, green banking, and reduce unsustainable economic activities. Their decision-making needs to be in line with the net zero central banking in the areas of monetary policy, regulation, and supervision, and portfolio management functions. Central banks and supervisors therefore need to address both environmental and social risk to financial stability through prudential policy by supporting inclusive green finance. Central banks generally have the mandate of ensuring price stability and financial stability. While financial inclusion may not be an issue in developed countries, this is extremely important in developing countries, which are heavily impacted by climate change. Central banks in developing countries need to pay attention to financial inclusion along their mandate of financial stability, and also complement inclusive finance drive with consumer protection and financial education. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, and ladies and gentlemen, while different players have a role to play in mobilizing support to address climate change and sustainable development, DFIs have been recognized as critical actors in this regard. They support by promoting environmental sustainability, particularly by combating climate change, introducing climate mitigation and adaptation measures, and placing them at the core of DFI's operations is essential in maximizing their impact on sustainability. They also play a critical role in enhancing inclusive finance, and for that matter, inclusive green finance. Driving inclusive green finance is also necessary for promoting financial stability. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. You're making me feel like taking the next flight tomorrow morning to my hometown. Mr. Chairman, kindly permit me to acknowledge a few people. First of all, I want to thank the Almighty God for the strength and wisdom in bringing me this far. I truly appreciate the grace of God on my life. I want to thank my wife. I don't like calling her Prof, but in this gathering, let me use Professor Patience as a YINDENABA ABOR. In the house, there will be a different name. And our children, Ivana, Bastian, and Benka, for your support and encouragement all these years. My family is somewhere there. My son had his A-level graduation this afternoon, so we had to rush from that place to this event. I really cherish the support and encouragement of my parents and siblings. I cannot thank you enough. And some of my siblings are here, and some joined the Zoom call from the UK. My pastors, Reverend Isud Anaba, Apostle Clement Ancheba, Very Reverend S.N. Mensah, Reverend Cornelius Yakun, Reverend Clement, Reverend Michael Aikade, for all your prayers, counseling, and support. I want to thank Professors Kofi Inti and Paul Boache for spotting the potential in me and hiring me to join the School of Administration, now University of Ghana Business School. Professor Kofi Inti is here. I remember at the interview, I hadn't met him. Right after the interview, he walked past me and tapped me and said, "You are very good." And Prof, the goodness is showing. To Professor Kofi Osei, my first lecturer in my very first finance course, I appreciate your encouragement and also introducing me to the ARC network. I really appreciate your encouragement. To my academic mentors, Emeritus Professor Ernest Aite, Professor Lema Sembet, and Professor Victor Morende, for the mentoring you gave me when I joined the ARC network and continue to give. I'm also grateful to Emeritus Professor Nicholas Biekpe, my PhD supervisor at Stellenbosch University, and Professors James Stock, Jeremy Stein, and Malcolm Baker, and professors at Harvard University. I've benefited from the advice and direction of many academics and practitioners, and I want to thank all my academic and professional cheerleaders. But permit me to just mention a few. Professor Akila Kwasoya, Emeritus Professor CMB Tego, Emeritus Professor Annaba Alemna, Emeritus Professor Jacob Sogsori, Professor Benjamin Ahunu, now Professor Bruce Banoya Kubu, Professor Thomas Akabza, Dr. Nisoa, Dr. George Ijukum Donko, and Dr. Aaron Issa Anafuri, for all your encouragement and advice. I really appreciate that. I actually learned the legal concept BATNA from Prof. Aki, and he taught me the basics of negotiation. Prof, thank you very much. My appreciation goes to the University of Ghana and the University of Ghana Business School for providing the space for me to function in this academic enterprise, and to all the institutions that provided me with scholarship and research funding and support in my work. I also appreciate the social network for friends, collaborators, and students. I can't thank everybody by mentioning names, but I appreciate all of you. And I pray God to bless each and every one of you for coming and for your support. Thank you.
A round of applause again for Professor Joshua YINDENABA. YINDENABA Abor. I've been corrected. YINDENABA. That's the name. Well, sitting down, listening to him, I got the impression that he has brought the primacy of development to us again, that all human beings, all countries in the world will need to place development on their agenda. But one of the pathways to develop a sustainable development is what he calls resilient development financial institutions. Now I ask myself, how do you build resilient development financial institutions in the midst of several challenges? Climate change, political economy issues, inadequate control by the central bank, lack of proper regulation, lack of enforcement of rules and regulations, etc. How do you deal with all this? And I found the answer in the word robustness. There's the difference between robustness and resilience. In robustness, you already have the conditions to actually withstand whatever attacks, whatever diseases, whatever you already have, you develop them. It's just like immunity. But in resilience, you are recovering the capacity to recover. And I think that as a country or as a continent, we need to develop robust institutions, robust policies and programs which are implementable. Because honestly, we have the policies, we have the programs, we have the legislation, but we do not actually enforce them. So robustness of our institutions, robustness of our policies is key to resilience. Resilience will come because you have already been attacked. But robustness, you already have the immunity. You can deal with whatever attack you have. So I think robustness is key in this regard. And one of the things that he mentioned, which I also want to flag, is the whole issue of the private sector. We in Africa, we have paid lip service to the private sector. The private sector, we say, is an engine of growth. But do we create the enabling conditions? We haven't. It's only in a few African countries, maybe South Africa, even that one, there's a question mark. We have not been able to do that. And then we keep on actually denigrating the private sector. Meanwhile, we say the private sector is the engine of growth. So how do we build an effective private sector to actually ensure both the robustness and the resilience of development financial institutions? As for climate change, it's going to be with us. But are we prepared to deal with climate change? I'm not sure. We again pay lip service, we are dealing with this, we are dealing with that, but have we tackled? Do we have laid down policies and programs to effectively deal with to effectively deal with climate change. We have not been able to do that. And finally, whether we like it or not, he mentioned the issue of that loans must benefit the local actors. We need to deal with political economy issues. We are promoting our own interests, party interests, ethnic interests, what have you, but we are not really promoting the national interest until Ghana and other African countries are able to promote, the public interest. All our developing financial institutions, all our attempts at dealing with climate change will not succeed. On that note, we thank Professor Abor for the lecture. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Professor AYEE, for those closing remarks. A round of applause for our chair, please. Thank you. Let me acknowledge on behalf of Professor Abor, Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari, First Deputy Governor and staff of the Bank of Ghana, the University of Ghana and University of Ghana Business School. There are a few presentations for Professor Abor. We'll take that now before I make my concluding remarks. Department of Finance. I assume that's University of Ghana Business School? Okay. Thank you very much. And then we have the University of Ghana Business School. To make your presentation to Professor Abor. Thank you very much, University of Ghana Business School. For that presentation. We've come to the end of this inaugural lecture. And in closing, I'd like to acknowledge the President of the Academy, Professor Opokunti. In addition to our chair, who is the Vice President for the Arts section, we have with us the Vice President for the Sciences section, Emerita Professor Kwachi. We have a former president of the Academy, Professor Akilapa Sawyer, who is here. Thank you, sir. We have also in our midst a former vice president for the arts section of this academy, Emerita Professor Adefio Shandov. And I would like to also acknowledge other fellows. We have Professor Clifford Tego, also a former Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, Professor AYEE, former member of Council of the Academy. I hope I have not left out my colleagues, any of my colleagues here. Thank you all very much. And of course, all the colleagues from the University of Ghana who are here to support Professor Abor, I want to thank you all. Let me also thank the schools here represented. We have Tema Secondary School, which is Professor Abor's former school, so you get the first mention. Laboni Senior High School, you were the first to arrive, so you get the second mention. And we have Presec. And I hope I haven't left out any school. Thank you all very much. We appreciate your audience. Abibi Broma are the people we saw performing here so beautifully. I'd like to acknowledge them and to thank them for entertaining us this evening. To everybody else, all our invited guests, I thank you for being here. As we leave this auditorium, refreshments will be served right outside. And I invite you to join us. Thank you. Now, please rise while the chair and the speaker leave the room. Thank you very much.